Backyard Farmer is a co-production of NET Television and Nebraska Extension.
Tonight on Backyard Farmer, we'll be learning about city sprouts in Omaha and showing you our flooded rain chain. That's all coming up next, right here on Backyard Farmer. Hello and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd and we've got another great show tonight, including answering your gardening questions. And helping me answer those questions, we have an expert panel from Nebraska Extension. Answering our insect questions, we have Michael Rethwish tonight.
Good evening, Kim.
We have turf and weed questions going to Rock Gassois.
Hi, Kim.
Lauren Giesler, Rots and Spots.
Always great to be here, Kim.
And horticulturist Elizabeth Killinger.
Hi, Kim.
You know, if you'll give us a call with your gardening questions, you can reach us by dialing 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 1-800-676-5446. Our email address is byf@unl.edu, and those questions will be answered on a future show, and that's also how you send us pictures. When you send us an email, please tell us as much information as you can, including which part of the state you live in or outside the state. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow those tweets on Twitter, and look at our video features on YouTube. Before we get to your questions, let's take a look at a few samples. And Michael, we've actually been getting some questions about your creepy sample.
Oh, yep, it could be considered somewhat creepy. What we have here is an American dog tick, and as you can see, it's fairly well engorged, so it's had a few blood meals. Usually they're a lot smaller than this. Generally, you're not going to necessarily see it in a well-manicured lawn where you've had short grass, but in the tall grasses and things like that is where you're going to be encountering these ticks. As far as personal safety, there are some things you can spray, such as cyfluthrin, permethrin, carbaryl, things that are registered for turf on these grasses. Personally, make sure you have long pants, and there are some things you can put on as well. But obviously, we need to check your pets as well. So we've seen these around, and they're going to continue to be around this year.
All right, thank you, Michael. They're just awful. Okay, Rock, a lovely weed sample.
Some of our viewers will look at this and say, well, what's Rock showing strawberry for? This is actually wild strawberry, and it's one that can be extremely invasive. Apparently, Kim, you have a little bit of it in your yard.
Just a tad.
Just a tad. And when you have a tad, then you get multiple tads. And it spreads aggressively. The fruit is kind of tart, and it doesn't really produce much. And the thing is how do you want to control this? This happened to be in a lawn. And being in a lawn, you can use some of the broadleaf type products. I would just stay away from 2,4-D containing products, only because it's a waste of product and you're introducing a herbicide that doesn't do much. Those products that contain triclopyr in them, those products will work very, very well. As with any herbicide, avoid the three highs: high temperature, high wind, and don't spray when you're on a Rocky Mountain high.
Thank you, Rock. Okay, Lauren, I don't even know what to say.
I don't know. I'll follow that up for sure. I've got something here a lot of our viewers know I like to tell people to rogue it out, so I brought an example of something to rogue out today. This is a rose bush that has rose rosette. Could be some of our other viruses that we see in roses as well. You see the real shoestring leaves on there that we're seeing on the top, a lot of bright red color many times on the upper leaves. The other thing we'll see on the actual stems, you can see how the density of thorns is really high, and those thorns are longer than normal. So if you see some of these types of symptoms on your rose bushes, they won't all look the same if you have a planting. The idea there is to definitely get out there and remove that. I can tell you though, in my landscape, I have several that I have not rogued out, and they have gradually spread. So if you want to keep the other ones healthy, rogue those out that look that way and start over.
All right, thank you, Lauren. All right, Elizabeth, what do you have tonight?
Well, I have something a little bit prettier than Lauren's sample. What I have is a viburnum sargentii, Onondaga. I'm always going to screw that one up. But anyway, a viburnum nonetheless. It's a mid-season blooming one, and it's super fun because it has both sterile and fertile flowers on it. So the big showy ones here are the sterile ones. The little ones in the center are actually the fertile ones on this one. In viburnums across the state, we did see quite a bit of winter kill to the point where some of the shrubs might not be able to come back from that. So be on the lookout in your viburnums to see if you had a lot of winter kill out there. Also, be on the lookout, for some of these fun mid-season blooming ones. They don't have a lot of scent to them, but they're still really, really fun and really pretty to look at.
And that is kind of a nice plant, not as widely known probably as some of the others. So thank you, Elizabeth, for bringing that in. All right, you get the first picture question, and this is a great one, Michael. This is from a McCook viewer, Red Willow County, and she thinks she knows what it is. She thinks it's spiny rose leaf galls produced by the cinnamon wasp, and she thinks they're beautiful. She also said she opened one and it appeared to be empty. She wonders if the larvae are small enough that she didn't see them. And she kind of wants to know about the emergence of the wasps. She's just going to let them be because she doesn't think it hurts anything, but she kind of wants to know about the emergence cycle.
Well, she is correct. This is a wasp that does cause this particular gall. And actually, they only have one generation a year. So what may be happening, sometimes after the eggs are laid, it can cause a proliferation of the growth around it a little bit. And this could be happening because usually the wasps will come out in the springtime. So it may have already come out and laid eggs, and we're seeing this proliferation now because it's new growth. So that's probably what's happening. They're probably very, very small, or the eggs have just started to hatch, which is why they may not be finding them at this time.
That's pretty cool, pretty interesting. Rock, you have a Western Nebraska question as well. This is actually from Champion, and it's a viewer that has this particular grass in her buffalo grass. She wants to know what it is and how does she manage that.
Yeah, I'm going to say you probably want to control that. This is a cool season grass. It looks to me like tall fescue, but I wouldn't, from the picture, I can't accurate tell whether it might be brome, but I doubt it because it's just not clumpy enough to be brome. Anyway, it's a tall fescue. It could have blown in on seed. There's any number of places it could have come in on. The trouble is right now in the buffalo grass, there's a little or nothing you can do short of hand digging or roguing, as Lauren would say. I would suggest that they start mowing aggressively. And you say, well, why are we mowing our buffalo grass? That'll help it spread. I noticed the stem was pretty good, but it could be a little bit better. Start mowing aggressively. You might knock the crowns off a little bit of the tall fescue and knock it out a little bit quicker. And then come next fall, after the second killing frost, about 27, 28 degrees after the second one, not the first one, just go over the top with Roundup. You'll knock it out along with dandelions and any other weeds that happen to be in that buffalo grass. Relatively easy to do and relatively efficient.
All right, thanks, Rock. This is a Seward resident, Lauren. They had a white flowering lilac that looked fine, and then it did this. Not all the stems, but many of them, they turn black below the blossom, then they bend over. He plans on cutting the infected ones out. He also says there are purple flowering shrubs on either side that are not showing this. He wants to know, he must watch the show because he wants to know, is there anything he can do besides rogue out the infested stems? And will it spread?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. If he doesn't have it on the shrubs beside it, there may be some resistance actually with this. It looks a lot like what we see in apples and pears when we see fire blight, and this is related. This is most likely not that same organism though. There's a different bacterium that causes that. But nonetheless, you'll want to, because it is a bacterial infection, go about 7 to 10 inches down below that affected area and prune that area out and just use sanitation for now. The other thing, if you can, avoid any overhead irrigation if it does happen to be in an area in the landscape that has a sprinkler irrigating hitting it.
All right, thanks, Lauren. And Elizabeth, yours is also from Western Nebraska. I didn't do that on purpose, viewers, but it just turned out that way. This is a Sydney viewer, and she wants to know whether we have seen this and if we can help her identify it. She does say it's in part to most shade.
Okay, and that's going to be our indicator right there. It looks like it's a Solomon seal. Not real sure if it's a false Solomon seal or a true Solomon seal. And I think she also said that it didn't really bloom. And the thing with Solomon seal is the flowers are really kind of inconspicuous and fairly small. And if it's at the end of the branch, it's one type, and then if it's in the leaf axils, it's the other one. And then followed by berries, and then bright yellow in the fall. And so it likes that shady environment, does really well there, and it spreads. And if it's happy and you like it, go ahead and leave it there, and it'll naturalize that little area.
Excellent. Thanks, Elizabeth. A public gardening program in Omaha is providing educational opportunities for urban kids. For our first feature tonight, we're going to hear about the City Sprouts program in Omaha.
2015 is the 20th anniversary of City Sprouts. It was started in the mid-90s, 1995, because this neighborhood, Orchard Hill in North Omaha, was undergoing a lot of problems, a lot of social ills at that time. There was a lot of violence, gang violence, drug activity, alcoholism. Concerned neighbors gathered together and they wanted to change this place of death and despair into a place of hope and growth, and City Sprouts began. What we've noticed as we've been here for 20 years is an increased commitment to the neighborhood, better interaction with the neighbors and people getting to know each other. We do a Little Sprouts program for tiny gardeners ages 5 to 12 to teach them the benefit of growing food and the enjoyment of being outside in nature. So many kids these days do not understand where their food comes from. So when they put their hands in the soil and pull out a big handful of potatoes, they are amazed. It's like they didn't know where they came from, or they pluck a radish from the soil, and they're so amazed. Even with our chickens, when I go into the coop, we have 9 hens, and when I go into the coop and put my hand under a bird and pull out an egg, the eyes on the kids just get huge, and they're like, what? It's like, where did you think eggs came from? And so there's that nature deficit, or that disconnect where the food comes from. So by providing these opportunities for city kids to learn where the food comes and to experience some of that enjoyment of the earth, it really makes a difference in the quality of their life. They have a busy community garden.
Oh, the back one's back there now?
Yep. In addition to the vegetables, what we're producing are kids who are trained to do work.
I mean, when I came here, I wasn't expecting any of this. Just that I was just gonna be here for a while and I'd be gone, but I never imagined that I would get something this big out of it.
Anne came to us from North High. She was very quiet, very reserved, and not very friendly at first. She'd been adopted. There'd been some trials in her family, and she was struggling with being connected to her family and to school. She came here thinking that she might like what we were doing. She became so ingrained in what we've done here that she's back for a 3rd season with us as an intern and hoping to have her own farm-to-table restaurant. So those are the kind of results where you see you're really making a lasting impact on the next generation.
It gave me the connections that I needed to know what I wanted to do first of all, and then now I have connections for when I go to set that up. I have people that I can go to.
And through our training here, I think we've really helped them quite a few of them to figure out where they want to go, or at least help to eliminate some of the things that they don't want to do. So Annie has been a great example of how training can help her find something that she's passionate about, and I think she'll be very successful because she's so passionate about creating wonderful, healthy meals and about the whole process from the seed to the table.
Making something yourself and seeing how it turns out, it's very rewarding.
And we hope that Annie will always come back to City Sprouts and share her successes and her challenges with us so that we can help her. And we'd love to see her be very successful here in the Omaha area or wherever she plans to go.
I like watching it stage by stage grow into something beautiful and then being able to be used and not wasted. Not everything's been the easiest, but being here, it gives me hope that everything's going to turn out just fine.
It really is amazing what this type of program can do to not only help those city kids discover where food comes from, it also provides a chance to rebuild lives, and that's really fun and a neat story, 15 years worth. All right, Michael, you get the next picture question. It is a grub.
Okay.
And the question is, when is it time to deal with them? How do you deal with them? And how many of them do we think is the threshold beyond which you should do something other than just let the birds feast?
Well, there's always fishing.
There you go.
We got it. With white grubs, we have some that have a 1-year life cycle and some that have a 3-year life cycle. Right now, what's happening, those that are a single-year life cycle or those that are about to complete their 3-year life cycle, they're feeding for a little bit, and some of them have completed their feeding, and now they're coming out as adults. So usually we're looking at after the egg lay and at the hatch for the best time for control. That's going to be later in June or into July. So it's really hard to make that determination right now. That's going to have to be made later. And then we'll have information about that when that time comes.
All right, excellent. And 1 is not enough to worry
No, 1
about.
is not enough.
Okay. Rock, this is a North Platte viewer, and she says she's been battling chickweed and bindweed, and now she has a new battle. Wants to know what this one is.
Kim, I think that's the, what's it called?
Oxeye daisy.
Oxeye daisy, thank you. I wanted to call it Shasta, knowing that wasn't true. But that's oxeye daisy. It's a prolific reseeder. It's extremely invasive, and it's very difficult to control. But because it is prolific reseeder, some of the first things you want to do is use some sort of pre-emergent as a first line of defense. And that can be anything from corn gluten mill to pendimethalin-based products, that sort of thing, in either the ornamental bed or in the lawn. Generally, you see it in more open areas like an unmulched landscape bed or something like that. Spot spraying can work. You can, before it heads, try to get it hoed out. There's a number of different things you can do, but it's going to be a never-ending battle against oxeye daisy.
Excellent. Thanks, Rock. All right, Lauren, this is a Southwest Iowa viewer, and he has brown spots on his spinach, his beets, and his radish leaves. And he wonders what they are and is there a remedy?
There's a couple things that come to mind with this. I don't know if he's grown these specific crops there before that he could have a bacterial disease possibly that's splashing up from the soil. The other thing, looking at those, it looked like some of them are almost like a sunspot or something like a burn. So just evaluate the situation. If it is something that we think it's a disease coming up, any kind of mulch or protection of that soil from splashing up on the leaves is going to help a lot. So maybe even a little bit of straw or something on there if you have it available. If it is, the other thing would be to try to avoid any overhead irrigation. So I'm not going to recommend any management as far as a pesticide because I don't know exactly what it is from the picture. So the next option would be to take a sample and submit that to a diagnostic clinic.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Elizabeth, we actually had 2 different viewers send us 2 different pictures of exactly the same plant. They think it was planted by a bird. They think it's beautiful. They want to know what it is and how they would manage it if they decide to keep it.
It's a Tatarian honeysuckle, and this one is susceptible to aphid damage. And so oftentimes what happens after the aphids feed is you notice that witch's broom or a lot of growth towards the end of the branches. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do when it comes to that aphid damage. Once the damage is done, there's no reversing it, or spraying for aphids isn't going to help any. If it gets out of control, you can take 1/3 of the largest canes out over a 3-year time span, and then rejuvenate that shrub over time. There are some invasive honeysuckles that are out there. Linicera maacii is one of the ones that is an invasive species. So you need to make sure whether you have the good guy or the invasive guy before you decide to go ahead and remove it.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. East Campus here in Lincoln is undergoing some major renovations, including a new pedestrian area on the southeast side of campus. Along with those improvements, a chance to plant new shrubs and new trees. For this week's Green and Growing Tip, Jeff Culbertson plants a tree.
Well, we're still right in a great part of the year for tree planting. The weather's been great. We've had some good rain. The temperatures are good. So if you haven't gotten around to planting a tree, it's certainly not too late. What we're doing here today, here on East Campus, is we're planting some shingle oaks. So it's a well-adapted tree for this area. Does one of the many oaks that do very well in this part of the state. And you can see that these trees are larger than normal. So most of us aren't going to plant trees quite this large, but these trees have been sized appropriately. The root balls are appropriate for the size of the tree, so that's why they're such a wide and deep ball on these particular trees. And so it's important before you start a project like this that first of all you make sure that your utilities are located, things like cable, electricity, sewer, all those sorts of things, to make sure you're not planting on top of something. And then you dig the hole appropriate for the size of the tree. You know, we don't always consider modifying the soils, but if the soil is ultra clay or tough to plant in or dig, then you might want to consider adding some compost or something like that.
You might not ever get a chance or have to plant a tree of that size, but the principles are really still the same. That planting depth is critical to get that tree off to the right start. We see an awful lot of trees that die because they are too deep. Michael, you get a question from a Lincoln viewer about chiggers.
Okay.
And the question is, what is the best way to control chiggers in a lawn?
A chigger is actually a type of a mite, and so you're going to be looking for something that's registered as a miticide that also has a turf label on it. We've kind of limited our numbers of products in the past from what we've had. We've had some that were effective, but you're going to be looking for something that's going to be labeled as a miticide and also has a turf application. That's what you're going to be looking at. You're probably going to need 2 applications to break the life cycle.
And I can attest that they are out there and biting based on my ankles. All right, Rock, this is a Southwest Omaha viewer. They are getting ready to put new mulch in their landscape beds. They've had persistent problems with a variety of weeds. They kind of want a green solution with the new mulch, and they wonder whether something like preen with the mulch would work.
Yeah, you can do that, but the mulch is a really good weed control all by itself. Or if they, by green, Kim, I'm assuming you mean lean towards the more natural or organic.
Right.
And then they might want to consider a corn gluten mill-based products. Many of the garden stores carry them now. Just understand when you put that down, you don't need to fertilize for at least a year because the corn gluten mill carries a fairly significant amount of nitrogen with it. But once again, that's a naturally occurring product. It's a byproduct of the corn processing industry, for lack of a better term, and can work really, really well. But if they do want to use a preen product, remember that preen is very short-lived, so you may require 2 to 3 applications. There are other landscape-based pre-emergents that you can use as well. So if they want to put one down, I'd put it down before you put the mulch down, unless you expect the mulch to be carrying weed seeds in it. But if you don't expect, if it's good quality mulch, you don't expect to be carrying weed seeds, put the pre-emergent down before you put the mulch down. Put the mulch down over the top.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Rock. All right, Lauren, this deck of cards right here is all questions about impatiens.
Awesome.
So you want to give our viewers an update. And I think we had a segment on this a week or 2 ago as well about are there alternatives to the issue with impatiens and downy mildew?
Well, I think a couple things. Most of our diseases in general in the backyard are not going to take impatiens out totally. I think if you're going to have that occur when you see downy mildew, that's something that you're going to have a little bit of it. I have yet to see a disease that really wiped out everything. So while people get kind of fearful of this, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Personally, I would go ahead and plant impatiens and see what happens. You could manage it, and Kim.
We have seen quite a bit of impatient downy mildew, and it makes the leaves look like skeletons on them.
Okay.
And in that instance, then you're looking at not the traditional impatient, but like a sun patient or a New Guinea impatient or caladiums or some other shade lover for that would be a good substitute for that impatient if they're worried about or they've had the impatient downy mildew.
So
Apparently the youngster on the panel pretty much just dissed
No.
Well, I haven't seen it that severe. So if they have it out there and it's that severe, then they want to watch and do something different. But in general, I haven't seen that many that really just wipe everything out.
Yeah. It does depend on the situation. All right, Elizabeth, our Twitter question from last week goes to you, and it was 5-year-old pampas grass keeps getting smaller each year. This year there's no green at all. Rogue it out, Lauren, or wait. And I believe our viewers kind of scratch their heads on this one, so you get to answer it.
And for once, I get to say, rogue it out. If there's no green growth on it at this point in time, it's not going to green up, so you might as well rogue it out, take it out, and then start something else there.
All right, excellent. We did see a lot of death in grasses this year, too. Of course, the big topic tonight is the rain and flooding that has occurred in the eastern part of the state, and our garden had its share of too much precipitation this past week. Before we go to break, let's take a minute to visit our very wet garden. This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we had the opportunity to lay almost 10 yards of great mulch provided by Landscape Services. We got it all spread on our paths in all of our major walking areas, and then we got 7 inches of rain. So the beauty of what you're seeing in the Backyard Farmer Garden is both the power of water and the paths it runs if it is not covered with mulch or turf or plant material, and what happens when you actually have stabilized those locations. We'll be doing the repair work so that we can get that mulch back into place where it belongs. We do know that once the Doctor of Plant Health students and that group that is working on the garden at the top of the hill, once they get that established and covered and mulched, we won't have the same issue with the water running down that bare soil, running down a path in the garden, and carrying the mulch to the bottom of the hill. But again, it's a great opportunity to take a look at what is working where, what isn't working, what is the pattern of the water, and thank heavens we had a lot of that mulch down before we got that rain. It's time for a short break. Coming up on our show, we'll have Gladys's Plant of the Week and the lightning round. Stay tuned for more Backyard Farmer right after these messages. Welcome back to Backyard Farmer. We've got more of your questions to answer, and later on in the show, we'll return to our garden to show you how effective a rain chain can be when we have the kind of rain we had last week. You can still phone in your questions, dial 1-800-676-5446. While you're doing that, we'll start the lightning round. Are you ready, Elizabeth?
Yes, I am.
Is St. John's wort invasive?
No.
Is there a shrub recommendation for a short spot along a retaining wall, north side, sunny, in Laurel, Nebraska?
Sure.
And that would be nice try.
It depends on if you're looking for evergreen, if you're looking for deciduous. Some of the short creeping junipers or some of the fancy little spruces could probably work in that type of an environment.
All right. Is it normal for the bark on a Crimson King maple to split? This is a Nebraska City viewer.
We'll oftentimes see frost crack on that south or west side just because of the thin nature of the bark.
All right. How is it possible to tell when a street tree is in danger of falling over? This is a Glenwood, Iowa viewer.
If it's leaning and the soil is heaving at the base of that side, that's an indication the tree could fall over. Either that or, if it's not looking in overall good health, have an arborist out and take a look at it.
All right, excellent. You ready, Lauren?
My feature tonight's pepper-crusted pastrami. I prefer to have no impatient downy mildew.
All right, on that note, would there be diseases that would cause the old canes and raspberry bushes to not leaf out, or is that simply old canes?
Yes. They would. There's anthracnose that you would need to cut out, so I would do some pruning. It depends if they're second-year bearing canes, specifically.
All right, excellent. Is there any treatment for powdery mildew and chokecherry, or is it not necessary?
At this point, I wouldn't. As we get brighter days, I think you'll see a lot of that go away.
Is the window for controlling the diseases of pines closed?
Typically, when we get to about 3/4 candle elongation is when we would stop any treatment. So based on what I've seen, I think you could still do treatment.
All right. Several local nurseries in this community are recommending spray programs for fungus in turf. Is that a recommendation or not?
I'm going to say generally not. I mean, it just depends on the situation. You need to know your disease history and what you're trying to combat before you're going to do any general fungicide application in any landscape or plant species.
All right. Leaves falling off the sycamores have a dark blotch in the center. Is that the beginning of a disease, do you think?
With the wet spring, it could be anthracnose or septoria gets also on sycamore. So it could be the start. I'm just going to go ahead and follow up since I got a little time and the buzzers rang. So you really want to look at that and assess if it's a young tree and you're establishing it. You know, a fungicide application is many times beneficial to get that tree established better. Many times our larger trees can handle it, even though it will defoliate a lot of the tree.
All right. Thank you, Lauren.
He just used up my minute.
You gave it to him. Are you ready?
Kind of lunch meat.
Sure.
You're ready. Like.
All right,
Bologna.
Rock. How widely available is fertilizer without a pre-emergent in it? This is from a viewer who listened to a show a couple weeks ago.
There's a number of different places you can get fertilizer without a pre-emergent, and also the co-ops are a great place to get slow-release fertilizer without pre-emergent on it.
All right. Does digging dandelions out of the yard help with control? And this viewer knows that a fall application is also good.
Yeah, you can dig them out. You need to probably go about an inch deeper than the soil line.
All right. Is it possible to spray anything around ornamental plants that would control both brome and weeds without hurting the ornamentals?
If they're leafy at the base, no. If they're bark-like and they don't have colored bark like the red twig dogwood, then you can spray Roundup or anything that has diquat in it, which is a non-systemic broad-spectrum herbicide.
All right. Seed washed out in a number of locations. Is it too late to reseed lawns?
Not at all, because the soil temps didn't peak here. We got cool again. We're good to go.
All right. Turf is growing an inch a day. Should it be bagged or mulched?
Or you got to mow it more than once every 7 to 10 days. So yeah, I'm going to follow up because that's a great segue. I don't know if Kim planned that on purpose or not, but the bottom line is that the turf is growing like crazy, especially if you've got fertilizer on it early in the season when we would normally recommend it, along with your pre-emergent. And so there's no way to keep up with a winkly mowing. If you're only doing it on the week, that you better be bagging. Put it in your compost pile, mulch as long as it hasn't been treated within the 2 mowings prior, and you can do something with those clippings, but otherwise you're going to scalp it and it's just not going to recover very well from that damage.
All right, thank you, Rock. Are you ready, Michael?
Do I have a choice?
Nope.
Okay.
All right, this viewer says it looks like there are aphids or something under the curled edges of their apple leaves. What would that be, and is there a treatment for it?
It could be aphids. At this point in time, I wouldn't recommend a control because there's lady beetles and things like that out there that may control them naturally.
All right. When should we expect chinch bugs to appear in the turf?
If it ever gets warm, again, those are very warm season pests, so it's going to have to be hot out there for that to happen.
All right. Is it possible for the phlox plant bugs to be attacking the garden phlox already?
I guess so. I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay. Are there organic or other touch the earth lightly methods of controlling insects in fruit trees that you're familiar with? A spray she's after.
It depends upon the pest because different pests are going to need different controls.
All right. Genista worm was terrible in Genista and the Baptisias last year. Is that something that, again, overwinters in landscape ornamentals?
I'm not familiar with that one. I don't know.
All right. That'll be one we'll need to look for because I know in some years it's terrible. Thanks. You guys did a nice job in spite of yourselves. Okay, Elizabeth, Gladys has shared really a beautiful combination, including the vase that we all covet.
Yes, I mean, the whole package is something that everybody wants. So we're going to start off with the purple. The purple is a bulb called allium, related to the onions. The cool part is you can grow the bulb has offsets, and you can grow more from that way. Or if you let them go to seed, they will sprout from seeds, but it takes 2 years for that seed to sprout. Lots of different colors out there, from whites to purples to even pinks and some yellows that are out there. Some people are allergic to it, so if you're not real sure, don't plant too many of them. The other one, the green one, is one that's really kind of fun. It's the Jack in the Pulpit. And it is a tuber or bulb as well. It really likes the shade. Native to North America, it needs to have consistent moisture. The tubers cannot grow out. The thing about Jack in the Pulpit is the spade and spadix, this piece in the middle here will produce some seeds, and the seeds will look like Skittles or bright red M&Ms on the stem. And the thing with those is they are poisonous. And so you want to make sure that if you have children or pets running around, that it's kind of tempting to go ahead and pick those bright red berries off because they kind of look like candy. So you can remove those before they become very tempting. But they're really fun to look at, even though they can be a little poisonous.
Excellent. And we want to say thanks to Gladys, as always, both for growing really beautiful things and sharing them with us. All right, Michael, you get the next picture. This is a viewer from Crescent, Iowa, farm outside. She's got 100-year-old ash trees. She thinks they have borers of some kind. She does have mushroom growths in some. She's got all this bark splitting off. She's concerned, of course, that it's the emerald ash borer and wants to know what we would suggest for her.
Well, there's lots of borers that will attack ash trees, so we don't know for sure that it's the emerald ash borer in this situation. There's a red-headed ash borer, and there's a banded ash borer. There's several species of ash borers that it could be. So I don't know that we can make a recommendation for emerald ash borer without actually knowing that's what it is. And if it's already inside the tree, it's really difficult to control it.
So does she have someone come out from USDA, Forest Service? What does she have?
Obviously, you need to have someone come out and see if you can capture some adults and to see what species you're actually dealing with, because it makes a difference.
All right,
Yes.
Thank you, Michael. And 100 years is a long time for an ash. Rock, this is a viewer in Omaha, found a strange plant in the lawn, and that looks silver, but it's actually just shiny, I think, those leaves. His lawn is thick. He's just mainly curious if it's something cool, or is it a weed, or what should he do about it?
It's a fairly common weed throughout Nebraska, but mostly in the eastern half of the state. It's prostrate vervain. It does have an interesting little coloration to it, as you can see. Not really variegated, but it does get that glossy look that gives it, and it tends to be darker along the edges. It's an annual forb, native. You can control it if you want. He said he had a fairly thick lawn. It usually doesn't really do well in disturbed soils, but it does well in soils that aren't frequently cultivated, so it should be relatively easy to just reach over with a carpet knife or something like that, clip it at the base because it has a single taproot, and roll that plant over, and pretty much it's toast.
All right, thanks, Rock. Lauren, this is a viewer who had a corkscrew willow, and he said earlier this spring about 2/3 of it didn't leaf out. The branches were blackened and brittle. The blackening seemed to occur at the base. He's still getting the occasional blackening despite removing. And so he's wondering, is he doing the right thing? Will it recover? And is it affecting potentially another plant close to it?
This picture that we're looking at now is a real nice representative of a canker right in the crotch of a larger tree like that. Unfortunately, when you have fungal cankers like that, from that point up, you're going to have significant infection. So if that's lower on the tree, I think I would start to train if it's got some suckers coming up or something around the base to try to get that up. Any type of sanitation you can use from the standpoint of cutting out 3 to 5 inches in this case, because it's fungal, below that affected area, and you're going to continue just to need to do that. This is going to be equivalent to like a Cytospora canker, in our dogwoods that we see. So just routinely managing that with sanitation is going to be your best option.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Same family, different plant, Elizabeth. This is a viewer who had a very nice pussy willow, and some of them started to attempt to flower, and then they got these canes that appear as though they're dead, and then it sprouted from the base, and it's a big old stump. So they're wondering, should they cut that old growth out? Should they cut the new growth out? What should they do to try to get this plant to rejuvenate itself?
With the branches that are bare or brown and they don't have any foliage on them, they're probably not going to have foliage on them this late in the season. So you want to go ahead and prune those out, but leave as much of that green growth down there at the bottom as possible, so that way it can put energy into the crown of the plant and hopefully be able to come back from the roots.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of that in pussy willows on campus, including, I think, on campus this year. Last season, we showed you the installation of our rain chain around the backyard farmer garden. For those of you who watch our winter program, we also featured getting those plants installed. Right now, we'd like to return to the rain chain to show you how it worked to control that 7 inches of water that happened last week. We've been showing you the progress on our rain chain just adjacent to the backyard farmer garden on East Campus. And there's really no better time to talk about it than after we've had 7 inches of really hard, driving, intense rain in Lincoln. What has happened with our rain chain is we got it planted last fall, pretty late in October. Our master gardeners helped with that. We got great establishment with our plant material. But we did not mulch, and we did not mulch on purpose, because had we mulched everything in the rain chain and gotten 7 inches of rain, the mulch would all have been at the bottom of the hill. What you can see here, though, is that we have really excellent drainage in what we call number 1 and number 2 at the top of the hill, and number 3. Number 4 holds water for longer, which means that the percolation into the subsoil is not as good. And this is really the first opportunity we've had to be able to see that what we call our wet meadow does function like a meadow. We have some erosion down that sort of topsoily soil on the edges of the bank. We will be able to fix that again. Once we get greater plant density, we'll be able to hold those slopes, and that's the whole point of a very densely planted rain chain or rain garden or bioretention or bioswale element in the landscape. The beauty also of what you're seeing, though, is that the water is slowly diminishing, which means the plant roots and the soil are taking up that water. It's captured, it's being cleaned, it is returned then to the land rather than going down the storm sewer system. The plants in the bottom of the rain chain are the ones that will have to tolerate the greatest amount of standing water for the longest period of time. The ones on the slope, intermittent, wet and dry. Ultimately, what we hope to have here then is something that is a beautiful wet meadow. The sedges are doing beautifully. We have a lot of things like the penstemons that will begin to bloom here pretty shortly. The beauty of the lowest wet meadow is that it did not overflow. So even though we had that great intense rain, it did not overflow, wash into the sidewalk. So essentially what we're trying to show you here is on a smaller scale in your own home landscape or in a small commercial setting, you can actually do a pretty simple capture of runoff, hold it, release it, and use that in your landscape. It may not be practical to install a rain chain that big in most home gardens, but hopefully you can see the value of managing all that water as well as utilizing it effectively. And I was really pleased with what happened. I was expecting the worst. All right, you get the next picture, Michael, and this is kind of an interesting one. We actually found this in the backyard farmer garden, and guy on the right, guy on the left, what are those things, and are they good, bad, or ugly?
Those are two forms of the same thing. On the left-hand side of the picture is the pupal stage, and on the right-hand side is the larval stage of it looks to be the Asian multicolored lady beetle. So some people like those, some people don't. It's nice to see they're out and about already and keeping the aphids under control.
There you go. So interesting to see the creatures side by side. All right, Rock, this is a Lincoln viewer, had these particular plants all winter and then they came into bloom. He's pretty sure it's a weed of some sort. He does want to rogue it out. Lauren, he is interested in knowing if we can figure out what it is.
Yeah, it's one of the yellow-flowered mustards. Sometimes it's referred to as wintercress, which is actually generic for about 22, 24 different species that are out there, not to be confused with garlic mustard, which has a white flower. But that said, they're either they're either biennial or annual. Generally, when it's in the flower stage, it's on its last leg. You can rogue it out if you'd like before it sets seed, which would be a good idea right now, or cut it off, mow it off, whatever you want to do. And then you should be able to keep track of the seed and realize since it's a winter annual, it's going to die as soon as the heat gets up. But keep the heads down or keep the heads pruned back or something along those lines. You don't need to really spray it; it's going to die anyway. But at the end of the day, you really don't want to put a herbicide out for something that's going to take care of itself. But you do want to keep it from setting seed and that seed then being spread around the yard for next year.
So let those pollinators have it first and then get rid of the seed.
That's a great point, because those are very early for the early pollinators, not just bees, but other ones as well. Thank Kimber for bringing it up. That's the mustards, especially the yellow flowered ones, because they're more attractive, are really perfect for those pollinators. And since we do have a shortage, it's a good idea to leave them be, but don't let them set seed. So if you keep on cutting them back, they'll just flower. Cut them back, they'll flower. That's a good thing. Thanks for bringing that forward.
Excellent. All right. While mushroom hunting, Lauren, this particular person came across this one, growing out of the base of a stump, wonders what it is and whether it should go into the edible bag.
You know, the first thing, I would not ever put something that we don't know for sure you haven't collected before in your edible bag. Even if we looked at it and said, you know, there's a 90% chance of this, any of that error is too much to risk. So never do that unless you're 100% sure of that identification. The other thing with that, I can't really tell exactly what it is. The underside of that large shelf fungus will give a lot of clues. If that has gills or if it's porous, would identify which one it is. There are a lot of different oyster fungi out there, some of which are edible, but there are others that are decomposers that are going to be more woody, that are not going to be palatable and you're not going to want to eat. So in any event, take another look at the underside, and then look up different species of oyster mushroom. Maybe one of those.
All right. Thanks.
Don't eat
Lauren.
it though.
All right. Elizabeth, this is a viewer who has this particular perennial in their yard in Omaha. And they planted it last spring. They can't remember what it is, so they're wanting us to identify it for them.
This is a really fun perennial, Pulmonaria longifolia, lungwort, and so that one's fun. Probably raspberry splash, because it's got that kind of pinkish kind of tint to it. Really likes that part shady environment, fairly long-lived. You don't need to do much to take care of it, just adequate moisture and just let it be happy.
All right, excellent. This is a South Central Nebraska viewer, Michael. They have a 3-year-old peach tree that has sticky stuff coming out of the branches and the trunk, and they wonder if this is serious.
It doesn't sound good. I suspect we have a species of peach borer that has found the peach tree and has bored into it. Not 100% certain of that, but it's a really good suspicion at this point in time.
And not a whole lot you can do about that.
No.
All right. Rock, we have a Wyoming viewer who has little purple flowers taking over the lawn in full bloom right now. What do we think is in full flower all over?
It's probably henbit, which is a member of the mint family. If they slice it, they're going to see that it's got a square stem on it. The only other thing that it might be would be Creeping Charlie, and I'm still thinking it's a little bit early for flowering on Creeping Charlie, so I'm pretty confident it's henbit. It's a winter annual. We mentioned in the winter cress, it's going to die on its own, but it does produce a prolific amount of seed. If you don't control it this year, you're going to get it next. I'm not sure about the pollinator value do the pollinators work it? I don't know.
I'm not for sure.
Interesting
on that one
question.
either.
Anyway, I don't know that for fact, so I'm not going to say, is that a yes? Did you say, yes? Okay, that's a yes. So the insect dude said yes. Dude. So anyway, but you do want to keep it from seeding, and it's actually, I've rolled some in my fingers, and it's producing that little dark seed that it's already producing. So I'd be pulling it, yanking it up, getting it out of the ground. Once again, why spray it? Because it's going to die on its own anyway. And actually, it's interesting. If you spray something that's right on the edge of setting seed, it just, you kind of piss it off, and then it just makes more seed. So let's not be doing that.
Okay. Lauren, this is a Kearney viewer. They have apple trees, 5 of them. 4 of the 5 have yellow spots. They're on the south side of the house. They're 20 years old. Heavy yield last year. They don't think it's cedar apple rust. What do you think?
Well, if 4 of the 5 are different than the 5th one, if the 4 is, if that's a different cultivar of apple, I'd bet quite a bit it's cedar apple rust, and you've just got a cultivar that's resistant in that situation. If they're all the same, then we could be looking at something else. But this time of year, based on that description, I would highly suggest cedar apple rust. You're just going to want to look at a general fruit tree spray if it is significant. We've had a different weather cycle this spring, so wetter conditions would favor more rust, and you definitely could see more in that situation.
All right. Elizabeth, this is a Blair viewer. Tomato plants, etc., so it must be the vegetable garden. They're wondering what is the best time in the life cycle of the garden to mulch those plants?
Right away. We don't, especially with the tomato plants, you don't want to give that soil that opportunity to splash onto the leaves. And then you're going to get some of the blights in there and other nasty rots and spots. Also, that mulch helps to maintain consistent moisture on those plants, so you don't have quite the big issue of blossom end rot on some of those as well. So mulch as early as you can, then you don't have to go out there and weed before you can mulch.
Which is
not very much
better.
fun. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it also buffers temperature extremes. So there's get the mulch on there as quickly as you can, right?
Exactly. All right, viewers, we're going to post our Twitter question for this week, and you get to tweet your answer at BYFUNL. A 10-foot lilac shrub has a lot of old growth and not much flower. How and when should I prune it or cut it all off 6 inches above the ground? So you get to tweet your answer, and we'll see whether next week's horticulturist can actually answer that question. All right, we have one announcement, which is the Lincoln Iris Society's annual show this coming Saturday the 16th from 1 to 4:30 at St. Andrews. Number is on the screen there for people who want to participate, and I have seen some beautiful iris in flower already, so that's great. We have a really interesting set of pictures for kind of our last round of questions, gentlemen, and these came to us from the Panhandle, so I'm going to ask you each the same question. This is, we want to say thanks to Jim Shield and Gearing for capturing, and then I think we have credits for the photos on here. So, Michael, the temperature dropped to 22 degrees for 12 hours or more overnight in the Panhandle. What's that going to do to the insect populations out there, do you think, or is it going to make any difference?
How much snow was on top of them?
14 inches in some places or more.
They may have been insulated.
Oh, I'm not sure that's the answer we wanted.
If they're out in the open, 22 degrees is going to be not too good for a lot of insects, but under the snow and other things, they were probably insulated.
All right, excellent. Rock, same question. What happens to turf in that situation? It did melt relatively quickly.
Yeah, the ground with even out west was pretty warm, and the snow didn't hang out very long, according to the people that I talked to out there. Turf's going to be fine, and the beautiful thing about turf is as long as that crown isn't winter killed, it's going to regrow, and if it was already actively growing, and you got the insulative properties as well, it's good to go.
Good moisture. All right, Lauren, 22 degrees and moisture, what do we see for potential rots and spots, either in the landscape or the lawn?
Biggest thing I'd be concerned about would be anything that was just newly established. If we had any seedling plants in that situation, even if they were protected with something for frost or freeze injury, that soil's cool, all that saturation, you could have some crown and root rots coming into younger plants.
Okay, and Elizabeth, yours might be the tougher one, which is what does 22 degrees do to the buds and branches on landscape plants and perennials?
We're probably going to see some damage on that if they weren't covered up by the snow. So the trees, a lot of trees can put on a second flush of new leaves. The flowers, no dice. They can put on new leaves. If they have to put on a second flush of new leaves, we're looking at it's going to take a lot of energy. Make sure that they're well watered throughout the growing season. If they were chomping at the bit and they put their garden in a little early, you're going to have to replant because that's a lot of snow on top of those plants, and those cold temperatures just are not going to, they don't do well together. So it's one of those things where you're just going to have to look at the plant, see what damage is there, remove it as it starts to fade or as it starts to die, and then make sure if they have to do a second flush of new leaves that they're well watered.
Okay, and we do know that it's probably of greater concern out in the Panhandle for the crops. Winter wheat, sugar beets were coming out of the ground, so we are concerned about that aspect as well. All right, we have time for just a handful of very quick questions. Michael, you get one, and this is a question about asparagus beetle larvae are eating all the asparagus. What to do?
I'm assuming at this point in time, if they're eating the asparagus, they are on the fern part of it, of nut versus the spear. I might be wrong on that.
Don't know. They didn't say specifically.
If it's on the fern part of it, I wouldn't worry about it. A lot of times you just kind of can knock them off.
All right,
I
and
wouldn't
if it's
spray
on
it
the
because you want to
Right.
eat the crop.
Right, exactly. So you don't want to spray if it's spearing.
Right.
All right, less than a minute, Rock. Is there a good grass to plant around the base of a pine tree that has been lifted?
I hate to be brutally blunt, but why would you lift the limbs on a pine tree, and why do we have to grow grass all the way underneath the base?
In other words, that's a no.
That's a no.
And mulching is a good idea.
And mulching
right?
is a great idea.
Okay, a few seconds here. This is a Fairfield viewer, Lauren. They have a 30-foot bur oak that continues to lose leaves from the top down, 4 to 5 feet. Any potential for a canker sitting in there, or
There could be, if you're losing large branches at different points. Just look at that, see if you see any evidence of sunken areas or dark spots on the branches. Prune those out. It's going to be fungal 3 to 5 inches down from those affected areas.
All right, thank you, Lauren. And unfortunately, Elizabeth, that's all the time we have for Backyard Farmer. We want to say thanks to our panel for another great show and to everybody who submitted questions and pictures. Helping us on the phones tonight, we had Gladys Juring, George Edgar, Kate Gall, Carol Rustad, George Maley, and a Nebraska Extension Horticulture Assistant, Terry James. Next time on Backyard Farmer, we'll be hearing about an update on the emerald ash borer. Nebraska Forester Mark Harrell will give us information and tips on what you can do to save your trees. We'll also hear from Dennis Ferraro about keeping a few turtles around your home pond. So good night, good gardening, and we'll see you all next week right here on Backyard Farmer.